Hello, everyone. We are about to start in 3, 2, 1 now. Hi, my name is Scilla Alecci. I work with the ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. I'm a reporter. I also coordinate our partners in Asia. And I'm going to be moderator/speaker. I will talk as little as I can, because the first rule of collaboration is listen. So we have a great panel today. We are going to talk about different topics. We have all the journalists here on stage have different backgrounds, but the mission is the same, to hold powerful people to account, as well as criminals, or just business and corporations who exploit very legal loopholes. So near me is Boyan Lim from Newstapa, Korea. And then Paul Radu from OCCRP, Svea Eckert from NDR, and then Axel Humlesjö from SVT, Sweden. They will have great presentations for you, and I must brag about this. This is the most multimedia panel of the whole conference. So you will have video and chats, and I hope this is more a conversation where everyone can share tips and lessons learned and ask questions at the end, and hopefully get out of here with more ideas to how to collaborate. And so maybe tonight at the pub or bar, whatever you call it, instead of talking the latest Netflix show, you can talk about the next collaboration that you're gonna do. So the first one is Paul, if you can come and...
Sure. Oh, okay. Sure. Yes. So then I don't need the mic, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. So hi, I'm Paul Radu. I'm one of the co-founders of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. I'm obviously an investigative reporter, and our focus is, and we've worked on this for the past 12 years, obviously organized crime and corruption. So this took us internationally. We're, a very large global network right now, working with the reporters and editors and investigative reporting groups all over the world. And really, our interest is all, that we want more investigative reporting done. We want more cross-border collabs done. So I'll just show you at first, a brief video. This is one of our latest investigations. It's called Troika Laundromat. And this will highlight the fact that what we do is we follow the money across borders. And we build large teams of investigative reporters to work together, but not just reporters. Data people and other, scientists, for instance, who can work with such data. And I'm referring to financial data that is really hard to swallow sometimes. Not only because it's large volumes, but also because, some of it is financial data that's very, very dry, that doesn't really tell a story at first. So let me put some context to this. And this was a video that we used in order, but you'll see it.
This is Troika Dialogue, once Russia's premier investment bank. And this was Troika's president, Ruben Vardanyan, a Russian-Armenian businessman who is known for his friendly relationships with the West. Publicly, Troika was a powerful financial institution led by one of Russia's most progressive businessmen. Behind the scenes, the bank was devising a hidden system of offshore companies that helped Russia's elites launder money, hide their assets, and evade the law. Here is how Troika's laundromat worked. Troika established 3 offshore companies in the British Virgin Islands. These 3 companies paid formation agents to establish dozens of other companies to funnel the money out of Russia. Money flowed between these companies in a coordinated network. Many of the transactions were disguised as fake trade contracts and loans. This system allowed corrupt politicians and organized crime to buy luxury goods with complete anonymity. To make this transfer of money possible, Troika needed a bank that would turn a blind eye to its dubious financial transactions. Enter Ukio Bankas, a Lithuanian bank that shuffled millions of dollars through Troika's system before it was closed by regulators. Troika also relied on unwitting proxies to obscure the identity of the shell company's real owners. Reporters spoke to this man, an Armenian construction worker, who was unaware that his signature appears on financial agreements worth more than $70 million in the laundromat. So who was benefiting from this multi-billion-dollar network? You might recognize some of the names in this cast of characters. Companies affiliated with Sergei Roldugin, a cellist and alleged proxy of Putin, received $69 million from the pipeline. The family of Vladimir Ochikov, the former governor of the Samara region of Russia, used money from the pipeline to purchase a $16.6 million property in Spain. Vardanyan himself used $3.2 million from the pipeline to pay his credit card and his children's school fees in London. These names are just the tip of the iceberg. Reporters found more than 75 companies and hundreds of millions of dollars connected to the Troika network. When reporters spoke to Vardanyan, he said he couldn't be aware of all of Troika's transactions and that his bank acted legally. There is no definitive proof that Vardanyan knew of Troika's scheme, and he has not been accused of wrongdoing by authorities. But by pulling back the curtain on this scheme, we see how Troika allowed powerful people to move their vast wealth offshore for their own gain, at the detriment of the countries they live in and the quality of life for everyday citizens.
So I just use this, for a bit of context. I won't talk about this story because the idea, I believe, of this panel is to share the tools that we're using to develop such large projects. This was a project that involved many media, including, for instance, here in Germany, Süddeutsche Zeitung, and we worked excellent with them, including The Guardian, BBC, the Globe and Mail in Canada, and others and others and others. We also cooperated on this project and on a previous project with the Korean Center for Investigative Reporting and such. So the idea is, it all revolves around cooperation. There's no large investigative project nowadays that doesn't involve cooperation. So I'll just point out, simply to some of the problems that we had, during this project, and some of the things that went well. Okay. How do I do this? Okay, I'll just use it like this. So I just put it in like 6 kind of steps to efficiently coordinate this type of follow the money kind of cross-border collaborations. And it's really, in the case of Troika, we got a lot of data. We got millions and millions of banking transactions. So that's, hard to swallow, for any journalist, like you see all these lines of transfers, banking transfers, and invoices that back these transfers, and all that, So really, what was crucial for us in the case of all our projects this far was to put a lot of work in understanding what the data was about. So we didn't want, to co-opt other reporters, other news organizations, to work with us on the data without first understanding what the data was. So we got a leak from multiple sources. We needed to understand what the data is to be able to share in an efficient manner. We didn't want to waste people's time, So that was crucial. And because in my opinion, you have to propose some value to the others. If you want to co-opt people, people need to know that they will gain something out of it. It's not just that you're giving the data. You have to give a lot more than data. So as a coordinator, for instance, of this Troika Laundromat project, I put a lot of work in it. I read lots of documents. I searched through the data. I worked together with the data team, and I'll go there right away. So it's very important in the first phase, in my opinion, to build like a small team that works with the data, that tries to understand at least partially what the data is about. The next step that we take with most of our project is to split the data. If you have a wealth of data, you don't just hand over a chunk of data to people, because people will, and journalists from outside your organization usually have a lot of other work to do, and you got to convince them that this is value to them. So what we always do, we split the data, in country-based information, and that's, our tech team does that, So these are the transactions that concern Germany. These are the transactions that concern South Korea. And maybe, the South Korean center will be interested in those or not. But we also want everybody in the project to have the big picture, because we want people to get focused. We want them to invest time in the project. We also want them to see the larger picture, because when you investigate organized crime and corruption, this is never limited to one single country. It always flows across borders. So we index the data in various ways. We index it visually, we index it data-wise. We make all sorts of searches possible. And the key to this is to make available as many entry points to the data as possible. I think that's also key, because some journalists are prone to work more visually, to see the data graphically, in a sort of a split. And some others want to build their own code on top of the data. So I think it's very important when you build the network to take into account the various level of skills and strengths of the journalists. Also, one crucial point to this is that there's no project that stands on its own. All projects are built on something that took place previously, and that's a really, really important mindset. So, for instance, in the Troika Laundromat, we used, data, we previously done, this Azerbaijani laundromat, Russian laundromat, and other laundromats. But we used heavily, with the help of Will Fitzgibbon right there, offshore leaks, the data in the offshore leaks, Panama Papers. So ICIJ was helping us big time with this, because again, when you go for the larger project, the big picture means that you have to cooperate with other organizations, with other data sets. So it's not just the collaborative team, it's the collaborative data, that sits in various parts. Now, what's also, what we always do with our data is we create custom code. So every project has its, like I say, flavor. You have needs, of that particular project. This was a lot of banking data. Banking data meant, from money went from point A to point B for this purpose on this date and all that. So we're always trying to create code that is specific to the data. It's not just that, because we've worked previously on similar projects. We recycled code from before, and we tweaked it to this current project. So that's also very, very, very important. And we always let initially the tech team to do the heavy lifting. So when I'm saying this is, for instance, we have this huge database, right? And I want the tech team to match the entities in this database against all our other databases. So in this case, like clearly put, we started with sanctions lists. And we saw from the very start that some of the people that were involved with these banking transfers in the Troika Laundromat were sanctioned by various governments around the world, or by the UN in the case of Iran. So this is also like very, very important to be able to map, to match data sets against data sets. And this is why, what's really crucial is when you engage other reporters, with your project, they will come with their own tech teams. So don't just, focus on the data, focus on the tools as well. So as long as you have this, sort of progress around the data where people mine it and say, hey, I found this story, I found this story, I think you have to have progress when it comes to tools to mine the data and to be more efficient with the data. And always accept help from the outside, because that's really, really important. The other thing that I found very, very important, especially when you go for follow the money processes, is to identify and share patterns. So for instance, in the Troika Laundromat case, what was really useful was that we used this automated type of searches, we matched, the data set against sanctions list, but we also did something else. We read it manually, we took, page by page, and these are thousands of pages of transactions and all that. And what we found by looking manually was that there were some insignificant amounts, and I'm talking amounts in the tune of $300, $250 that were transferred regularly. There was a pattern because, and this was the weak spot that these people left, behind them. the trail that we were able to follow. It wasn't just the big transfers, it was how they built the system. Unfortunately for them, they used the same bank accounts to form new companies, to pay formation agents to form new companies. And we were able to track that down and to see the whole cluster. You know? So the small payments, the $250 were much more important than the big payments, you know, in this case. So the idea is to identify patterns and share patterns, you know, and always look, you know, at all the numbers, which is sometimes not that easy. Another thing that I think it's important is to always challenge your assumptions. You know, I started with this, you know, so the Troika laundromat is this system that was put together to do this, you know. But then the idea is to test your hypothesis at all times and make sure that everybody is, you know, on the same page and you know, accept hypotheses from other people, you know. And also, you know, many times you'll have some team members going for smaller stories. I think those are equally important as the big stories. So as a coordinator, you have to accept and give equal time to everybody. I think that's really important for the collaboration to work. And last but not least, of course, you have to set up, you know, transitional deadlines, you know, so you have a date until the research should be done. You have a date until, you know, you have to contact everybody who's involved in the project and so on and so on. But once you set up, and I think, you know, the final deadline should be set up somewhere between, you know, 3 to 6 months in the project, you have to have a firm date when you publish. That's crucial, and you don't go away from that, you know. There will always be pressure. Oh, I have a TV program that can't run that Friday, but it will run on Monday. So can we change? No, you can't, because, you know, if you operate across frontiers with, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 outlets, you know, you can't do this, you know, because this is a lack of respect for others. So that's, you know, it's very important to not cave into this sort of pressure, and there will always be pressure. So I think these are just some of the points, and yeah, good luck with that. And if we can help in any way, I didn't go into tech tools that we have at our disposal to enable this type of cooperation, but we do have those tech tools, secure platforms, and, you know, tools to mine the data, to share the data, to do a lot of stuff with the data. So I think I'm done here. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So after talking about collaboration to investigate money laundering, we are going to talk about corruption in the UN.
All right, you see that well? Good. So my name is Axel, Humlesjö, as they used to call me in the United States, because nobody can say, but my name is Axel Gordh Humlesjö, and I was one of the journalists working on the project Deceptive Diplomacy that I'm going to talk a little bit about today, and some of the methods that are that you can apply to other projects. And essentially, it was about the murder of 2 UN experts in the Democratic Republic of Congo and how the UN was covering the investigation up. This was a cooperation between Swedish television, Süddeutsche Zeitung, Radio France, Foreign Policy Magazine, and Le Monde. And here's a video which gives you a small background of the what the story was.
Swedish politician Zaida Catalan was 35 years old when she started working for the UN in Congo. On March the 12th, 2017, she and her colleague Michael were led by a group of armed men towards a grove of trees. Zaida and Michael thought they were being taken to meet the group's leader. they didn't realize what the men were actually planning to do.
My question is, who recorded that? Who can plan this kind of murder?
They got killed not because they were being reckless. They got killed because somebody wanted to kill them.
He told us that his UN job was the safest job he'd had yet. Because nobody harmed experts. Nobody.
Secretary General, här har jag det. Han skriver, Dear Mrs. Moresby, please rest assured that the United Nations remain deeply committed to ensuring that those responsible for the deaths of Saida and Michael are brought to justice. Yours sincerely, Antonio Guterres.
To me, that looks very suspicious. You know, it's circumstantial evidence showing that the Congolese government may have been setting up Michael and Zaida to go to the very place where they were killed. And government's agents were involved in that very process.
We don't want to mess up diplomacy and what they're working at behind the scenes, okay? However, I also don't want a report to contain lies.
Did the Secretary General agree with your conclusions?
Apparently, yes.
Okay, so this project was going on for maybe over a year, and in the end, the whole picture of who was responsible for this murder changed by this investigation, and now there is a high-ranking military in the Congolese army getting prosecuted for conspiracy to murder. So how did we do this in a way that was successful? I think it's interesting to have Paul talking here, which is really one of the great pioneers when it comes to cross-border cooperation, and then of course the ICIJ and the Panama Papers and everything that have been going on since then. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those smaller projects, because you know, Paul and OCCRP are kind of like, if Panama Papers is the mother, Paul and OCCRP are the big brother, and we're kind of a small ICIJ baby, which I think can be very good sometimes, and which I think can be a strength and an advantage, because sometimes you don't have that kind of material that is applicable for the whole world. And to be too many in a project can also be a bad thing. I have my old colleague, very old colleague, Frederick Lauren here in the audience. And you know, when I started working at the Swedish intelligence, I almost said Swedish Investigation Journalism, he always talked about cross-border reporting and that stuff. And people were like, just shut up, you know, do your thing. We don't want any with your weird international networks. And then Panama Papers came, and now all the editors and all the bosses, they want corporations and cross-border like, if you have to say, I have a corporation, they will be, oh yeah, you get 6 months, you get $1 million, no problem. And then it's like, what are we going to do with this? Are we having, yeah, we have a big chunk of data, it's going to be great, we have a lot of good leaks, we have, you know, and we have 30 countries working on this. And then it's like, but what's the story? What's in it for us? And I'm not going to mention any projects, but I think for SVT, we've been, you know, seeing the ups and downs of this the last years. So I think one of the biggest things that I've learned with the Congo project was to pinpoint your group, really identify who do you want to cooperate with, who do you need in this project to become successful, and who do you don't need. Because when you work with the thing we work with, a leak from within the UN that was very, very sensitive, sources working in the Congo that could be killed in any minute. And it was a very important thing to only take people in that you could trust. And you could really look them in the eye, shake their hands, meeting at places, and trust that they would handle this material with care. Because it was really about our colleagues and our sources in the Congo and their lives that was at stake. So pinpoint your group, and for us, for example, I think it's a good lesson. It was about, in the beginning, we didn't have Foreign Policy Magazine like we had in the end, for example. So we invited Foreign Policy Magazine in the middle of the story or the middle of the project because we realized that we really need somebody on the ground in New York working the UN headquarters. Because before we were only Europeans and Congolese working on this. And then we reached out to Colin Lynch at Foreign Policy Magazine, and we can put him into the story. So I think rather than beginning very, very wide and inviting everybody in, you can start smaller and then you can expand your network during the way. And so, but what was important in this story was the language skills. There was 5 different languages in Congo. It was French, it was the Swedish case, which I worked a lot with. It was and then the American and the UN headquarters. So there were language skills that was very important. On the ground research, that was very important. So we had to recruit reporters in the Congo. And the basis for this whole cooperation was what I have seen in the ICIJ projects about this radical sharing theory, to really make everybody included in the cooperation totally equal. Everybody should have access to the material totally equal, and total transparency between the teams in this process. And the really best thing with this, not being, because some corporations I've been to before have been like, okay, we want to, like a normal corporation would be like New York Times go to Iraq, and then they hire Iraqi journalists and say, can you help us with this? And that's not really a corporation, but they call it a corporation. And in the end, most of the time, the byline of the Iraqi journalist will be washed away. But to really share everything has not only the advantage of getting better research and more eyes on it, it was a way of also double check and triple check the fact. So we would meet different meetings and have discussions. Are we coming to the same conclusions? Are we looking at this in the right way? Is there anything from a UN perspective that we need to bring up to be fair towards the UN? So really stress that to your editors and to the group. To be able to be transparent and trust, choose your group with care. The other thing that was a great a risk or problem was the source protection. And I think this we learned along the way was quite problematic, because first we decided, before we would share it with the whole group, with all 6 or 7 partners, we would clean the data. But half through that project, we realized that it was impossible. It was too many traces, there was too many individual notes, there was too much metadata in the Word files, for example, and the PDFs. So be very, if you're going to share a big material with sensitive source information in it, you really have to be careful and clean the data properly. If you do not do that, it can be, because the problem is that maybe the ones that receive the data knows how sensitive it is. But the third partner, the fourth partner, doesn't have that same realization, because he maybe doesn't know who the source are and how they need to be protected. So clean the data if it's possible. If it's not, really stress that in your group, to always have a discussion and a majority decision on how to share the material. Because we had some big problems with this, and not because anybody did anything wrong, but it was very hard, because at the same time you want to show people inside the UN some of the material to fact check it, but that was also exposing us for a risk. Another thing that we came to a conclusion about, because of this, was never publish originals. So it's a very tempting thing to put up all this data online. I mean, the ICIJ have done a great work with this. You can go in and search some of the files. But when it comes to like this, a secret UN investigation, we decided that we're not going to put a single file online or on television because it could be recognized and hurt our sources. And last, many times when we talk about corporations, we talk about leaks, and what we could see in this material was actually that it is very easy to be exposed for traps. If you get a big material, most of it you can double check and see this is correct, this is correct, this is correct. But there can be specific errors in the material that are there either to like trick the journalist, or maybe it's just a mistake. But we tend to view it as if it is an original document, it's true. But it's very, I think that was a common mistake that we did sometimes, that we didn't see these investigations as different forces trying to put something down on paper. First, in the beginning, we saw it as the truth. So really look out for that too. I think so in the end, this was a success, I think, because we were cooperating small and big companies together and really taking the advantages of each other. And we can't write the Congolese partners in this because they still are under protection, but without them it would have been impossible to really do this, because like the main story, for example, was that one of these high-ranking militaries, he was exposed being part of the conspiracy, and we could expose that by going through phone logs from all the cell towers in the area. And first we found, okay, so this is perfect. There's a cell tower close to the murder site where he made the call just before the murder. But you can't go to the murder site because that's super dangerous still. And the UN wouldn't let us go there. I was in Congo, they would never let me in there. But by having local partners, being able to go there and really double check that that was the right cell tower, that was what made us be able to publish the story, and without them it wouldn't have been possible. So thank you.
Thank you. Also, he's just back from New York because they won an Emmy, no? That was great. Congratulations. Svea, if you want to come. So now we have Svea Eckert and after that Boyang, who are going to talk about the same investigation from 2 points of view.
Yes, thank you very much. Really appreciate being here today. So let's start the presentation. No. Okay. There it is. Okay, good. Okay, so this presentation, it's about, we called the story Inside the Fake Science Factory. So we did this collaboration, this investigative journalistic project. I did this together with my colleague Peter, also from NDR, and one of the initial partners was the Süddeutsche Zeitung and the Süddeutsche Zeitung magazine. So these were the initial partners in this project. And it was about not so much known issue about predatory publishing. We got a hint from some kind of informant who told us, look at that, look at it and learn. And he told us so much about it that we got interested and that we started looking into the matter. So just, to take you with me, I think I have to explain a little bit. In short, it's how you make out of science, or how you make out of fake science, a lot of money. So this is everything in short. but now we will dive in a little bit deeper. So if you are a scientist and if you want to publish something in a good academic journal, I think about cancer medication or some really important topics, it's a really complicated process, and you have all these checks and balances and peer reviews, and everything is really complicated. And only if you manage to process and to go through this whole process and through the peer review, then your article as a scientist gets published in an academic journal. So these are the good journals, and now there are the bad ones. These are so-called predatory journals because they are kind of predators to the scientists because they take the money and you get some comments on it. Probably you don't get comments, and then you get accepted. And then your study is out in the open, and you can do lobbying with it, or you can sell snake oil with it. You can do whatever you want. And this was the problem the source told us. So the first thing we did before we collaborate and make everything was we did a small sting operation. So we fabricated a computer-generated paper. Was completely nonsense, only words after each other. So I don't, until today, I don't even know what it was about. And we invented two scientists. There was Peter was Christian Schreibaumer, and I was Isabella Stein, and we were from the University of Humlesjö. It's a village here in northern part of Germany where the Santa Claus is coming from. And we even got accepted with this completely nonsense paper. We got accepted with the paper at a conference. And this, what looks like a travel catalog to you, is actually a website where you can submit anything you want. And then you can travel to a conference, and they call themselves the World Academy of Science, Engineering and Technology. So you, from the outset, you would think, okay, this is probably a pretty well-known good thing. So now I show you the video from Peter and me giving our presentation, which I don't understand till today, because what we did was basically reading it loud. So it's I shortened it a little and
introduce us shortly. It's my colleague Isabella Stein, also from our University of Applied Sciences.
See here now is the relationship between our solution and the analysis of the memory bus. This is memory bus, and here on the bottom and here on the top, and all of this investigation where you would need a theory of ratback trees, but we propose another solution.
We used the 90s Nintendo Game Boy across the sensor network.
Which means the more pressure you give on the system, the higher the scalability gets, and that's what we wanted to achieve. And how would our system behave in here?
Yeah. And you all know this. A single particle is a reflection of quantum potentiality of the Greek philosopher Plato.
Thank you for listening.
Any questions? Okay, so that was quite funny, and the hard part was not to laugh during the whole presentation, because it was always hard to stay serious. So how can I close this one to get? There. And then I try to end it here. Yes, and go back to the presentation. Okay, after we did this in London, we were really sure that this was an issue. And if you think now, okay, they threw us out and everything was over, no. In the end, we won the Best Presentation Award for that. So, okay, so that was really funny. And then we on this conference, we saw many other scientists, and we even spoke to many scientists, and also we told them that we are journalists, and then they told us that they got scammed or that they like it here, or yeah. And we saw that these scientists, they are from all over the world, from India, from South Korea, from everywhere. And that was when we started to get the feeling, okay, maybe this is a good idea to start collaborating. And then we started to build a bigger picture. And the first thing we did was to identify different predatory publishers. We took 5, there are hundreds out of there, but we took 5 of the bigger ones. And then we scraped the metadata from the websites, and then worked with the metadata, put it to a database, worked with Linkurious, worked with Neo4j database, and also put it into Tableau, just to get a bigger picture, how many scientists in how many countries, and this was the result. So it was kind of a very big phenomenon, and you don't see Germany here, so that was also a thing what we thought, okay, so we definitely should reach out to all the colleagues in the world that we can investigate this issue, this problem of science together, that you can kind of submit everything and then pimp your career or sell snake oil, or if you are a lobbyist from, I don't know, tobacco or something, then you can push and pull out science in the world. And this is the Europe thing. So that, and we also looked at where are the conferences, and there you can see that you have many events. This is only one publisher in 1 year, many events, many cities, many countries, and this was the point when we said, yes, we have to collaborate. So we reached out to many media partners, and ICIJ was a great help to identify who could be a partner. But we also reached out to journalists who were not ICIJ partners, because some of them, we just read that they have written before about this issue, and that was the reason why we basically invited everybody to collaborate. To give you a small view into the machine room, so how did you collaborate with so many partners? So there were different instruments. So one instrument was we had a private GitHub where we, all the scraping tools were based there and were developed there, and everybody from our partners who wanted to have access to the GitHub could join, of course, and could use and scrape the predatory publishers for their own and to see for their own. But of course, not everybody has a data team, and so we also did this, what you in the beginning said, we sliced the data per country to make it easier for the partners to dive into their own data. So I had folders for Austria, Belgium, Croatia, France, Hungary, India, Japan. So that was very important, and we used the iHub for communication. But the last and most important thing is what my colleague Peter did a lot, is this. So in the end, truth has to be told, that there has to be somebody who is answering all the questions and who is there for the partners, and especially, I think many of you have worked with data projects, and data also has to be read correctly, and you have to explain a lot about what this data means. So we made it public, and the project had a kind of a big impact, was published in all the countries, and everybody dig out even more and more and interesting stories. And I think one story we are about to hear, right?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bo-Young Lim. I come from the Korea Center for Investigative Journalism, News Tapa. And what I'm about to present is, as Svea mentioned, how the story that started in NDR Germany ended up in Korea on the other side. It's cross-border session, so I'll talk about what happened across the border. So in a nutshell, I'll be presenting how small-sized newsrooms with investigative journalism functions, like ours, News Tapa, could use collaboration as a tool to not only make stories, but also maximize the impact in the local region. So this story was initiated as a global collaboration, thanks to NDR, but we also did another part of collaboration locally to maximize impact. It's all started like this. My editor-in-chief, Yongjin Kim, earlier this year received an email from NDR, Peter, and he said, maybe this is interesting for you. The reason, he said, was he saw so many South Korean scientists attending the conferences, young people and postdocs in groups, more than 10 people or so. Other countries had 2 or 3 people in groups, but Koreans were swarming the WASET and other predatory conferences, and that was very interesting. So what we did is, I'll make this very brief. As usual, I make my editor-in-chief do the legwork for me. So I sent him to Germany, and he met with Peter and Svea and had a face-to-face meeting and talked about what this is all about. And NDR shared their data and investigative know-hows about how to deal with this issue. As NDR did, we also did our own sting operation to show how many Koreans are going to Venice, which is a very popular attraction. And we also did in-house data scraping and cleaning for Korean-specific findings, and did research on the Korean participants. So this is what we did. And then our findings were quite shocking to the Korean academic circle. Korean scholars, individual scholars, were ranked 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 6th in WASET publication, the number of publications in WASET. And top-ranking universities, the best university in South Korea is Seoul National University, and they were the highest ranking of all Korean universities. And we also found North Korean top university, Kim Il-sung University. They were using omics to make their publications. The reason, our analysis of why so many Koreans were publishing in predatory journals and conferences, was that the government assessment on academic achievements was overly based on quantitative standards, not qualitative standards. We lacked academic integrity, and there was lack of oversight on misuse of conference budgets, which was the government research and development budget. So after the story, a day later, we published in July 2018, a day after the story was published, the government pledged major policy changes. There were new guidelines, and universities opened up investigations and took disciplinary actions, which was quite disappointing. Nobody stepped down, but still there were disciplinary actions. Search terms related to our story topped real-time search term ranks for several months in the South Korean internet. And earlier this year, in 2019, the government withdrew a nomination of a new minister nominee due to his publication in Omics, one of the predatory journals. So this has a great meaning in South Korea, because now if you are a scholar and you've published in predatory journals or participated in predatory conferences, you could not become a minister. It sets a new standard for high-level government officials. So one thing that made such impact was the opening of the documentary, and to save time, I'm going to share a link later. You could watch it with the English subtitles. The opening of our documentary starts with the black comedy style opening. You'll have to watch it. I'm not going to tell you. But anyway, that was my editor-in-chief's idea. So a lot of people gave us a feedback saying the opening was so interesting, I had to watch it till the end. It's 43 minutes long. And another thing was local collaboration. News Tapa has been founded 7 years ago. We're still very young, and compared to the big public broadcasters, we are a small group of investigative journalists. So our plan was to maximize impact through collaborating with the bigger public broadcaster, MBC, Munhua Bangsong Broadcasters. And this is our journalist, my colleague, Ji-Eun Kim. I think she's somewhere here. Her byline was on MBC's main night news, and that never happened in South Korean journalism history. Collaboration is pretty new to South Koreans. Competition is more important. So I would say this was very complementary collaboration, because News Tapa has a small size, limited resources, and a small speaker, so to speak. But we have a very strong investigative newsroom with international partners collaborating with us. But in the South Korean context, the governments react more sensitively towards reports from the public broadcasters like MBC. And on the other side, MBC had just undergone leadership change after 10 years of the conservative government controlling the media. So they wanted to make a change. They wanted to reinvigorate their investigative reporting. And they have bigger resources and more outreach. So it was a very strategic decision to collaborate with MBC. This is near to the end. So for a small nonprofit investigative newsroom, like many of the GIJN's members around the world are small-sized nonprofit investigative newsrooms, there are chances to find good stories and maximize impact in collaboration. So collaboration could be a very good tool for us. And while local collaboration works, but the strategic goals of each partner should be defined very clearly. And in our experience, I'm not going to go into details because this is about cross-border collaboration, but our experience with the local partner collaboration, we needed more preparations on the tactical level. So how are we going to divide the work, and how are we going to approach our the scholars who went to WASET, for example? Those kind of things weren't really clearly defined, because this was one of the first local collaborations we had on reporting. And there's the culture-specific issue. Now, a lot of the people here might have experienced local collaboration, but in South Korea, collaboration is still seen as the anomaly, not very normal. And so how can you convince the bigger partners is a challenge for us. And another thing is the sustainability of the big and small collaboration. So this is the link to our documentary. And if you have anything about Korea, North or South, this is our email. You can talk to us. And let's just see if this works. No. Okay. Okay. So thank you very much.
Hello, yes, so I am also a speaker, sorry. Okay, let me start. So just like anyone else, I also have a video, so that I don't have to talk much about the content of the investigation, but more about how we did it.
We wanted to really test the approval process for medical devices. If we would build a vaginal mesh that was so dangerous and so ridiculous, would we get it through? So we bought a net of mandarins and we went to the notified bodies and we said, would you approve this? And they didn't see any problem.
The story is about things that are implanted into people, an area of medicine that is largely under-regulated. Hips that help people to walk, artificial lenses that allow people to see.
Certain devices help people, but you have certain devices that really permanently scar people. It makes sense to team up with a big team of journalists and say, why are these implants hurting the patients in our country?
It's not like drugs. You don't have clinical trials for every device.
A lot of these products are inserted into people without any testing.
As patients, people realize that they've been part of the evidence gathering and the experiment.
The 911 call reveals Bridget Rob's raw agony.
Oh, I'm not ready to die.
Screaming with each shock of the defibrillator malfunctioning in her chest.
The Pinnacle hip implant, it was not tested in humans before it was sold and surgically implanted.
Many of the companies will come to Europe in the first place to get market experience, and then if the device survives, they take it to America.
And now, instead of the standards getting better for implanted devices in particular, they're getting worse. All the focus is on getting products to market more quickly, because that's what industry wants.
And that race to the bottom could be a huge problem. In many parts of the world, there are no regulators whatsoever.
L'affaire des implants périmés continue de susciter des réactions au sein de l'opinion nationale togolaise.
Johnson & Johnson is accused of selling faulty hip devices to over 4,700 patients in our country.
When something goes wrong with the device, if the manufacturer isn't reporting it and the physician and the patient don't take that step, then you're not going to have the full story.
The public don't know when products fail. They don't know what the track record is of the products that they're getting implanted into them. We've grabbed all of the public records we can. We've asked our journalists to submit freedom of information requests around the world, and we will actually begin to do what authorities are not doing.
A combination of low requirements in the legislation, lack of transparency, and conflict of interest is really fatal to patient health. We want to know what's happening with certain devices. Patients are entitled to know this.
Thank you. So for those who weren't here at the beginning, my name is Scilla Alecci. I work with the ICIJ. I'm a reporter and a video journalist. And I'm going to talk to you about this investigation called the Implant Files that is a bit different from other investigations that ICIJ is sometimes known for. I can't speak German. Maybe I killed it. Okay. All right. So this investigation, why is it different? Because it's basically it was based on public records entirely. It was not based on a leak, and it's about medical devices. So at the beginning, how did the story come to us? It came with a local reporter, someone from the Netherlands. She's there. She had done this work before. She had reported on how medical devices are basically come to the market without being tested, and they harm people all over the world. What she had done, though, was mainly focusing on this medical device, an implant, specifically for women in the Netherlands. She came to the ICIJ because she knew that this was a global story. So as usually what ICIJ does, we decided to explore the topic and see whether this could be expanded to other countries. And after some initial investigation, we actually we saw that there was a story there for multiple countries, for the world. So we put together a team. A little bit smaller compared to other investigations, and especially because this was a very specific medical reporting story, and so we started with people who had also health reporters in their teams and who could provide expertise and guidance to other journalists who had never done this before. And then we started to analyze what we could do to make people understand how this story is actually global. So we decided that we wanted to understand first what the scale of the problem is, and then what's the role of the industry and doctors in all this. What's the responsibility of our policymakers, and then obviously we cannot forget the patients, the people who are actually the victims of this broken system. To do this, first thing, something that we love so much at ICIJ is data, but data that makes sense, not just the data for the sake of it. So we needed some data that could be the evidence for the problem, for how these faulty devices get into the market and actually affect people. We first tried to did a study on to understand which countries had more data on this sort of issue, and as usually happens, the US was the most transparent, even though it's only partial, but that's how we started with FDA data, and then we asked our partners to search for data in their own country, and that's where basically that's one of the things that we think collaboration can help with, which is have a similar format and similar templates for requests to your regulators and policymakers, so that everyone can request and possibly obtain the same sort of data that you can use to analyze the issue. In this case, it was adverse event reports. So we basically followed the world, because the team, the big team that we had, in total we issued about 1,500 public record requests to authorities around the world. The Mexicans were the most prolific, with 900 FOIA requests because of their federal system. However, only 40 came back. And that became also a story in itself, right? Because in theory, health should be a priority for our regulators and policymakers, and when it is not, and when there is no transparency, surely it is our duty to make it, to raise awareness on it. So. I'm not going to mention all the data that we requested, but this was quite significant, and in the end our great data team was able to collaborate with other data teams and find this and get to this final figure where more than 1,700,000 injuries were reported in the last decade and 83,000 deaths, that we didn't know that before. When you have data, what is also interesting is what you don't have, because as we know, data can be manipulated, or maybe for some reasons it's not there. At the end of the day, you usually have a little man or a little woman behind the desk in some dusty office inputting data. So you always have to ask and question, why is the data there, or why is it not? In this case, for example, we found with the help of experts, obviously, that there was a spike for injuries related to breast implants in the last 2 years, but it didn't match what according to the data analysis happened in the previous decades. And that wasn't because there weren't any injuries, it was because the authorities in the US and Europe had allowed company and device makers not to report those injuries. So thanks to our reporters on the ground in many different countries, from Australia, Italy, Japan, Lebanon, and many other countries, we found victims and people who could actually speak to the problem and kind of explain how this was bogus, basically. That data wasn't actually, it wasn't reflecting the reality. Another thing that we did, as I said, we wanted to understand the scale of the problem, but we also wanted to understand the responsibility of the multinationals, and collaborations are great for that. For the very definition of multinationals, they are in many different countries, they impact the life of many different people, and they try to exploit loopholes in several different countries, especially those who want to have, expand in the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and other developing countries with more lax regulations. You have to pay attention to what they say and to how they behave. Again, we used public records whenever we could, court records. In some cases, a lot of multinationals have their headquarters or some kind of presence in the US, so that it becomes more easier to get data in that sense. But for example, I remember there was this big company that was being sued by Brazilian insurers for alleged corruption, and the lawyers in the US were able to provide documents, even if it was about Brazil. in collaboration with the Brazilian reporters, we got documents from the feds, the Brazilian feds, who were actually at that time doing an investigation on this company. And so by matching these two sources, we could advance the story. Use, obviously, SEC filings whenever they are there, but also in countries where you don't have so much transparency, try to pay attention to what they say. PowerPoint presentations, PR, obviously you have to be aware that they are marketing strategies and there is always some kind of lie or probably something that is not really factual in there when it's written by a company, but sometimes they can lead you to good sources. For example, I was looking into how this company was working in India, and on YouTube I found a video posted by their Indian marketing strategist. I reached out to him, he was no longer working with them, and he gave me some documents that was really helpful. And obviously, as usual, you can't just report, from your side. You have to then go to the local reporter and ask for their expertise. And in fact, we were working with the Indian Express health reporter who had great sources. And it's something that I call like the hi-fi moments, when you have two really good researchers coming together and bringing to a successful lead. Another thing that we did was to look at, similarly to the fake science project, maybe to see how money was involved in the science and in the medicine, and how these doctors and companies were putting profits above patients' health. So we analyzed scientific medical journals, because at the end, supposedly at the end of every report, the authors are supposed to disclose their financial relationships with the companies, and you can see who is the author of the report. And if it is a company employee, you may have to ask a couple of questions about the content of the journal. Again, to investigate conflict of interest, that was a great tool, and lobbying records and hospital finances. So hospitals usually are public institutions, sometimes they're private, but if they are public, wherever you are supposed to, they are supposed to disclose more information surely than private companies. So that's also a great opportunity to investigate, for example, if there is any procurement corruption going on, or any kind of bidding patterns that doesn't fit, that is not regular. And then finally, patients. I mean, I say finally, but they were our concern from the beginning, because there wouldn't be a story about health without the patients. We wanted to understand how the global system was affecting people around the world. After we understood that a lot of developing countries were following regulations from the US and Europe, our European and US reporters covered the regulation and how lobbyists from medical companies affect the regulation, but we also tried to figure out the other end of the supply chain, whether those developing countries were getting the faulty devices that no longer using in Europe and in the US. And for example, Newstapa did a great investigation on that, because there was a Korean patient that was the victim of this scheme. And then another thing that we did was to ask patients for their experience, because that's something that we wanted to include as many voices as possible. So we had a little form that any reader could fill out on our website. We shared that form. We translated that into 5 or 6 languages now, I can't remember, including Arabic, Korean, Japanese, Italian, English, French, etc. So that every partner in the collaboration could have that on their website, and their readers or their viewers could talk to them, could access to that and send their own experiences. We got more than 10,000 people. So that led to more follow-up stories afterwards. And another thing that we did in the end was to create the first medical databases to keep track of the faulty devices that have been recalled or for which there's been safety alert, so that people from everywhere can either investigate. If you're a journalist, you can see if in your country, for example, that product is still being used, which is something that happened in Nepal just a few months ago, and today there was a great news about the Prime Minister starting to ask questions about that. Or, you know, it is an open tool, so anyone. We had a lot of people working in the insurance industry have appreciated with this tool, which is quite unusual. But anyway, this is the link if you want to use it for your own reporting. Yeah, I think we should have maybe 5 or 10 minutes for everyone's Q&A. If you have questions, you can come to the mic there, and can you give us your name and the name of the media, or if you're a freelancer?
Oh, hi, folks. I'm Rowan Philp. I'm a reporter for the GIJ newsroom here, and a question for Axel. Hi. I think Paul mentioned the importance of you know, these firm deadlines in the collaborative process, 3 or 4 deadlines between, you know, research and leaving the country in your case, I know. Could you tell us how that worked out in the deceptive diplomacy story? How between broadcast, radio, you know, text, you were able to synchronize these deadlines and make it work?
Yes, I think I forgot to mention that, but also about pinpointing your group, I think we were very happy in the end to have partners with different platforms. So we had TV, we had pod, we had online, we had print, and magazine, and that made it very good because we got a good variety of stories in different formats, but also in some way hard because we have different kind of production ways of production. Like when you are done with the story research-wise, maybe you have 1 or 2 weeks if you're a writer where you can put together the story, but if you're television, you have at least a month. So at this specific project, it was SVT that was having a broadcasting date, and that was so we did the planning after that date, and that was because, you know, for the group, that was one of the we could have, if we wouldn't have made television, we could have published earlier, I think, but we came to this conclusion very, very early in the process, and we never changed that. So
is it working? My name is Marcel Metz. I'm editor-in-chief of a Dutch nonprofit called the Investigative Desk. I've attended quite a few conferences, and it's always nice to hear stories about complex investigations and how things work out well. But on the other hand, the most instructive experience are usually things that went wrong. So I would really like to hear from all of you, from all your, some experience of what went wrong, because that's what we are going to learn from. Could you do that?
Yeah, I think, so referring to the Troika Laundromat, and I won't name names and all, right, but what didn't go that well was when talking to the people that we reported on, you know, when we got to that stage, you know, we had certain arrangements in place, but the problem was that some partners rushed up the process. You know, they wanted to talk first to those people. And that can cause big problems because people can preempt your questions, you know, and if you go and confront someone with only partial questions, you know, that's, you know, I mean, most people that we're writing about are very, very intelligent, very smart people, you know. They will realize what this is all about. So it's always good to coordinate when it comes to getting feedback, you know, from these people, when you need answers to. And that didn't work quite well. I think I didn't coordinate that very well. So that was a problem.
Okay.
For us in our project, we also had in the very end a very big problem because we also partnered with a magazine. And the thing is, when you partner with a magazine, they finish everything a week earlier, and then they go into print. And then you have to be like ice. You don't have to move. And so if anything happens, if the slightest thing happened, you can't do anything because you have to wait until the magazine has their publishing date. And we had the problem that there was another newspaper and they had a part of our story. They also had this, and they published earlier. But they did not cooperate with us. We didn't know, or kind of course we know, but we didn't know that they will be earlier than us, but you know. So they had their story out, and then we kind of got a little bit nervous, like, should we push our story out now, the next day, because we were all were news outlets, and we thought, okay, we could do it. But then we thought, no, we can't, because we have a magazine on board, we have international cooperation with television, with everything, and everybody wanted to publish on that date, and so we set it out with tears, but we set it out, we waited, because we thought, okay, if it was a small article, nobody kind of, you know, only a few people will read it, and it will be like the overture for our big story. Yeah. And it was the right decision in the end.
In our case that I just presented, we didn't have much trouble with the international collaboration part, but we did have quite a bit of trouble, trials and errors in communicating with the local public broadcaster, because they joined at the very end of the investigation, just about 1 or 2 weeks before the publication date. And we had 2 or 3 meetings, but they didn't really understand what this was all about, and they needed information, so they bugged my colleagues like day and night, phone calls and everything. So I think we didn't plan out the tactical method. Like we didn't present what this investigation is about and what we're going to do together to our local partners in Korea. So I think communication is very, very important. And in other, not the one that I presented, but I think in international collaborations in general, most of the times you don't see your partners face to face. So if you're just text messaging someone, things can get misunderstood. So it's very important to have phone calls or phone conferences or video conferences to not get rid of misunderstandings. And
I think for us too, some of the biggest challenges were when there was the coordination didn't go that well. So for example, reaching out for comment or just for an interview, sometimes when you have TV and print at the same time, you have to coordinate very well there, because if print goes and then the person doesn't want to talk to anyone after that, TV can't interview them, and that's a big problem. I think another challenge is, for example, when you have reporters and partners who are in smaller newsrooms, or they may be one person team, and so sometimes they kind of they tend to be left behind, or if you don't help them, guide them throughout the process, they may get discouraged and in the end not do the whole investigation, or just decide to leave the project, and that's a pity because it's not in the interest of the story.
This was a fun question because you start thinking about all the mistakes and problems and everything that you never talk about really. But I think one of the most it was a serious problem, but it was also very funny because it's a problem with sources. Because, okay, so you share everything, right? But then you have to, like, the leak or the material is only half the process. Then you have to double check it. You have to try to find. So we had sources inside of the MONUSCO operation, the UN operation in the Congo. We had sources in the UN headquarters. We had sources around the families and the investigators, blah, blah, blah. So anyways, we, in the end, we could sit there and be like, I have a great source. And then somebody else said, yeah, me too. Okay, so we have two then. They're on this specifics. Yeah, that's great. So can you tell me anything else about the source? Yeah, it's this and this. Oh, that sounds a little similar to my source. So maybe we all don't have two independent sources. We only have one source. And sometimes it was even worse than that. It was like I getting a source that had gotten information from somebody else in the cooperation team. So it wasn't really a source, it was just, you know, information going around and around. And I think that is a very serious problem if you don't get a heads up on it, because it's so important to protect your sources, and it's hard to share the names of people you trust with maybe people in other countries that you never worked with before. But I think next time I would like to have like maybe appoint a project leader for the team that could have an overview of all the nations' different like sourcing, and therefore be able to have a little more of a chance to say, okay, this information is going around. This is not really two independent sources, because that could, if we wouldn't have discovered it, that could have played out pretty badly.
I really have to share a similar story. We had a moment, we were sitting here in Hamburg, and we are getting hysterically SMS text messages from our partners, like, we are here in Vienna, and I think there are other journalists here doing a sting operation too. Oh my God, oh my God. And we were like, oh my God, who is that? Who other journalistic team maybe scoops us now? And then the day developed hours and hours, and in the end, it was other partners who did not tell us that they were doing two sting operations on the same conference. And it went all well. They were drinking beer in the end and having a nice chat. But these hours before we knew that these were two from our team were really challenging.
Thank you very much. I think we should have many more of these stories.
Thank you. You can always ask questions. Please, now we are done, but later, and we will be here until Saturday. And so, yes, please come talk to us.